First of all, you need to recognize who's playing scared, okay? Because a person in power, or even your manager or boss who's afraid, is a dangerous person. And nothing threatens a person who's afraid more than someone who is secure and confident and not afraid. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ruthless Truth. I'm your host, Truth Davis. This platform where it's an opinion teaching platform, really, where I kind of share my views on various topics based on what I think has been a unique life experience and points of view. So, typically I'll comment on news and trends, and then pick one subject or topic, go a little deeper on, which is will be today's truth. So, and when it comes to news, generally speaking, I'm not going to comment on sports and politics for a couple of reasons. One, you can get that anywhere. The number of sites and podcasts talking about sports and politics are ad nauseum. So that's what you want to hear, you want to talk about, there are a lot of places you can go besides here. Secondly, I don't know if there's really anything unique about my life experience that allowed me to talk about that, differently than what anyone else says. Sure, I observed it, and I'm a huge sports fan. You could argue I'm a sports fanatic across many sports. But, there may be occasions when there's something that's so big a sports story or so big a political story that it just can't be ignored. But generally speaking, that's not what I'm going to play. So with that, there has been trending lately, one story, and just coincidentally, the examples relate to sports figures. But the overall topic is this thing about older men and younger women. Now, older men and younger women has been going on since the beginning of time. It's not anything new, but with Bill Belichick and Shannon Sharp, there's been a little bit more of a light, shined on it, especially given the multi-decade age difference. And so I'm not one to judge. I'm not going to opine, but I will share kind of my 2 or 3 thoughts when it comes to this. First, you can't help who you fall in love with. Sometimes, and many of us had it, where you fall in love with someone despite it, because you could love someone who's really not good for you, but you can't help it. So you can't help who you fall in love with. Okay. Secondly, when you see couples together, a lot of times people ask, how'd they get together? Why is she with him? Why is he with him? You don't know what he does for her or what she does for him. We don't know what they're getting out of it. And without knowing that, it's impossible to sit there and say, there's no reason for them to get together. I don't understand it. Now, I think we can all assume certain things happen when you see an older, rich man with a younger, hot girl, what they're getting out of it. But we don't know. Which kind of gets to my third point on this, and then I'll leave it, which is it only matters that they know why they're in the relationship and what they're getting. And if they both know and they're both fine with it, why should we care? And I'll give you an example where it's not the case. I had a friend here, very successful businessman, multimillionaire. Wife has been ill for years and is terminal. And he started dating a younger woman, much younger. He's in his late 60s. She's in her early 30s, single mom, 3 kids. And he started bringing her to events. And it was fine. We knew why she was there. But where we got concerned is he really thought she was in love. He missed the fact that, no, dude, it's because she got money and you can buy her things. And as long as you know that, it's fine. But where we got concerned was he actually thought he was falling in love. He bought this woman an engagement ring. So I didn't say anything, but some of our friends had an intervention and pulled him aside and said, hey, that's not what's going on. So that's a bad situation where you don't know why you're in the relationship and you don't know what you're getting out of it. But I think that's more of an outlier. I think most of the time, as long as you know, hey, I get to be with a young, hot girl. Hey, I get to be with a guy who's taking care of me and showing things I couldn't. And if it works for them, shouldn't matter to us. But you just got to guard against reading too much into it and not being honest with yourself on either side of why a person is with you. And that goes with relationships, regardless of age gap. You need to be honest with yourself of what you bring to the table and why this person wants to be with you and vice versa. I can't personally speak to age difference. The age difference between me and my wife is 9 days. So, we're basically the same age, but we still went through those same processes of, what are you bringing to the table versus what I'm not bringing to the table. So that's all I got to say about that. But let me get to today's truth. What would you say or guess is the strongest human emotion? When you think about the range of emotions that humans can experience, what do you think is the most powerful one? I think it's fear. I think the strongest human emotion is fear. Now, this opinion is debated. It's not universally accepted in psychological circles, because people could argue love is a very strong emotion, anger, hate. Those are all very strong emotions. Okay. And I agree. But to me, there's no doubt that fear is the most powerful one. And I'll actually discuss that in a couple of areas that almost everyone is familiar. Let's first look to politics. Okay. There are many reasons why Donald Trump is in the White House. I mean, there's no one single reason, but I do believe one of the biggest drivers of it is the power of fear. And it's amazing to me, and somewhat comical at times, that some people, especially liberal Democrats, still don't understand. They still are perplexed about this election. They don't get that fear is more powerful than hope. There may be people, and there are people, who question the intelligence of the president, and I'm not going to say I've seen anything that I would attribute to brilliance, but I know this. He understands human emotion. He understands human behavior. He understands fear. Okay. He's very insightful in those areas, whether you want to admit it or not. And he understands the power of simple, repetitive messaging that strikes on emotional chords. Let me ask you this. Which one of these messages sounds more compelling to you? Let's take the Democrat message. Vote for the Democrats to protect and preserve democracy. Republicans don't care about you. They only care about the rich. They aren't going to do anything for you, help support you. We will. That's basically their message. Versus, these illegal immigrants are going to invade our country, take food off your table and money out of your pocket. And these criminal elements are going to rape your wives and your daughters and invade our country. I'll get rid of them and I'll protect you from them and all the bad things they may do to you. That's pretty powerful. That's a pretty powerful message, because fear is also blinding. All right. And unlike love or affection, which can wane over time, fear has momentum and sustains. If you're afraid of something, you're always going to be afraid of it unless something changes, unless either the cause of the fear goes away or is diminished, or something comes in or someone comes in to take on that fear, what the cause of the fear, and make you feel protected. We've seen both of those happen. You establish the fear, and then you set yourself up as the person that's going to protect you from the cause of the fear. And then people are like, well, that's not enough. Why would people vote against their own interests? Why would they vote for a party that, doesn't support them in all these other areas? Okay. Other thing about fear is it's irrational. And when you're dealing with someone who's irrational and a very strong irrational emotion, facts and data and logic, they hold less appeal. These people are much less concerned about macroeconomics, world trade, social programs, equal rights, other social issues. They just don't want to be afraid anymore. And that's going to, no pun intended, trump any other emotion they may have. Strongest human emotion is fear. Lisa Murkowski is a Republican senator from Alaska. The reason I bring this up, because there are many Republicans who don't particularly like the president's policies, and even less so his rhetoric and approach. But they are afraid to speak up. What are they afraid of? Well, here's what Lisa Murkowski said. I'm going to get this right. We are all afraid. I am oftentimes very anxious myself about using my voice because retaliation is real, and that's not right. So what are they really afraid of? They're afraid of losing their seat. They're afraid of losing their power. They're afraid of losing their standing in society. They're afraid of losing their influence, their financial security. And they're far more afraid of that. And they care far more about that than they care about making the country better or improving your situation. Now, people are like, well, how can they sleep with themselves? You know, rationalization is also very powerful. And humans can find a way to make sense of anything. The human mind does incredible ways of making sense of anything so you can sleep at night. So that's politics and fear. But let's go to another area. Let's talk about the workplace that just about all of us, if it's not experiencing right now, have experienced. If you're in any organization that has more than 20 employees, and it may be even less than that, you have fear in the workplace on multiple levels. But I think what may surprise a lot of people is where you find the greatest fear is up in senior management and at the executive level. Now that might seem counterintuitive. Like, what are they afraid of? They've already made it. They've climbed the corporate ladder. They've got the, they got the money, the position. What are they afraid of? They're afraid of losing it. Okay. And they have so much more to lose. So the fear runs even greater. And it's not just losing the position. You get to that level, the job is no longer what you do. Oftentimes, it's who you are. That's what your identity is tied to. Now, there is money. You lose your job, you lose your salary. But when you get to the executive level, the money is much more than just salary and bonus. When I was the SVP for sales and marketing at Comcast, now, if you just looked at my salary and bonus, that was about $500,000 a year, which is real money. But if you looked at the entire compensation package, the stock grants, the stock options, the financial support and systems, other executive perks, my total compensation package was more than 3 times. The total of that was more than 3 times what the salary and bonus is. And so that's a lot to protect and a lot to lose. So that's the money part of it. The second part is the power. Whether real or perceived, when a person achieves a certain modicum of power, they can get drunk on that power. And if there's any threat or fear to that power, they will sacrifice anything or anyone to keep it. Let me give you an example. When I started at Comcast, I started like in February of that year, as a C-level executive. And on the second day of the job, I was chief marketing and sales officer. On my second day, my VP of Marcom resigns. Now, Marcom is short for marketing communications. That's the part of the marketing team that does the advertising, the media, the radio, the web stuff, all the physical, visual things that you see, the sales support, the training brochures, that comes out of the Marcom team. So it's a pretty important team. You're talking about a budget of, hundreds of millions of dollars. And the second day, my VP resigns. So my boss tells me, hey, I know it's a setback, but the good thing is we have a really good bench we have a really good lot of internal candidates for you to look at. And I think the first guy you ought to look at is Gary. It's okay. So I sit down, I meet with Gary, and while I thought he was good, I didn't think he was great. So that's the first reason that I wasn't interested in hiring him. The second reason is that for whatever reason, the 2 most senior executives in the company, CEO and chairman, Brian Roberts, and then the president, Steve Burks, who's now is the president of NBC, but at that time he was over Comcast Cable. They didn't have a very high opinion of Gary. Now, I don't know what that was based on. I really think it really didn't matter, but it didn't make sense for me to bring someone in who, one, I didn't think was, excellent. And secondly, it's just a hard will to go when you come in and know you don't have support. So I didn't want to leave Gary hanging because these type of executive searches can take years, months to find the right guy. And I didn't want to leave him hanging because he was looking at internal opportunities and external opportunities. So I called him up and said, hey, look, while I haven't decided who I am going to put in this position, I can tell you it's not going to be you. So that he wasn't waiting on me and things fine. It's like, okay. So then I continue my search. I hire an executive firm. And so we get to October and I'm ready to make an offer. So I go to see my boss, Jim, and I'm like, hey, I got somebody I want to hire. I want to set time for you to meet him. And he's like, yeah, don't worry about that. I want to talk to you about something else. Okay. I want you to take another look at Gary. Okay, why? I thought we had this conversation. Why? Well, we're about to have a reorganization and there's possibility Gary's position may go away. But, he's a really good guy and we'd like to find, a place for him. Now, let me take a second to talk about good guy. Good guy is a great status to have in corporate America. Because when you get the good guy status, that's when you get organizational and executive protection. People will look out for you. People will make accommodations because they don't want to put you in a tough spot. And Gary was a good guy. I said, okay. So I said to my boss, okay, are you asking me to think about this? Or are you telling me to do it? And he's like, a little both. Just take a little time to think about it. I was like, okay, I'll think about it. This was a Thursday. I come back on Monday and I say, this is my call. I don't hire it. And he's like, okay, well, I just wanted you to think about it. I said, fine. So I think it's over. Next day, I get called in. I need you to hire Gary. What? Well, apparently Gary's boss and he had a really good relationship both inside work and outside of work. And his boss didn't really want to mess that up by firing him. I mean, quite candidly, he just didn't have the courage to fire him. And so now it's fallen upon us to find a place for him because he's a good guy. And it wasn't up for discussion. He's like, hire him. Like, okay. So I reach out to the guy and say, hey, I want to talk to you again about the position. Remember we were talking about it a while ago? And, Gary's not stupid. He's like, well, what has changed? You told me in no uncertain terms 5 months ago you wouldn't hire me. So I had to put together this song and dance story about, well, I've only been here 6 months and I'm new, but if I bring an outside guy, he'll be new. I think it might be better if I have somebody who's had some experience with the company and also worked in the field. So I think it'd be a great fit. Love for you to join the team. And then Gary asked me, well, what about Steve and Brian? I thought you said they weren't on board. Don't worry about it. That's taken care of. Jim's got that covered. You're fine. He's like, oh, okay. So at this point, he thinks he's in demand. He starts negotiating and making his demands before, you don't know if he's really ready to come on and join the team. I went to talk to Jim and say, okay, this is getting out of control. First of all, I didn't want to hire the guy. Now he's making demands on me. I'm like, Jim, he's asking for more money than I make. I am not going to pay him more than you pay me. He's like, really? Okay. Well, effective immediately, I'm increasing your salary $50,000 a year. Hire Gary. Okay. So I hire the guy. It's late November, after Thanksgiving or whatever. Beginning of January, I'm having a one-on-one with Brian Roberts, CEO, chairman, founder, son. We're just going, over the organization, how things are going, whatever. He said, hey, who's managing Marcom for you? Who's currently leading the agencies now, the ad agencies? I said, oh, well, it's Gary. Gary? Yeah. Gary's on your team? Yeah. Since when? I don't know, 5-6 weeks ago. And he says, how the fuck does that happen? I'm like, ruh. Guess they didn't cover it. He's like, I know you wouldn't have made that decision. Did Jim make you hire him? And I'm just sitting there going, come on, Brian. Come on. What am I going to say? I'm in a tough spot here. He said, you know what? Don't worry about it. I'll talk to Jim. So I immediately leave, run to Jim's office and it tells him what happened. And he's freaking out. I said, so you guys didn't cover it. They were afraid to cover that with him. I said, well, we have a problem. because I already had a meeting scheduled for the next week with Gary and Brian and the rest of the executives, or some of the executives, to kind of go over our plans for that year. And Jim was like, well, you can't bring Gary to that meeting. I said, well, it's his project. He has to come. Get over it. So we had a meeting. Meeting's an absolute disaster. Gary was nervous. He didn't communicate very well. I mean, it was a disaster. So after the meeting was over, Jim calls me back to his office and he says, damn, man, you were right. Should have listened to you. We should have never brought this guy on board. Fire Gary. I'm like, well, this is interesting. 2 weeks ago, he was a good guy that we needed to take care of. But now Jim's looking at the threat to him. No, he didn't give a damn about Gary. So he's like, fire Gary. And I said, no. He said, I'm sorry, what? I said, no, I'm not going to fire him. Sometimes the GM drafts a quarterback that the coach doesn't want. But once you put him on my team and he puts on the uniform, he's on my team, I'm going to play him. So I'm not going to fire him. If you want him gone, you can fire him. Obviously, I can't stop you, but I'm not going to do it. I said, besides, I couldn't possibly justify firing somebody. I haven't had enough time to evaluate his performance. Well, how much time would you need? I would need at least 6 months to be able to, fairly evaluate somebody's performance. Okay, fire Gary in 6 months. And that was the end of the conversation. Time goes on. Gary's actually doing a good job, better than I expected. And so things are going fine. A few months later, I get called into Jim's office. He said, hey, it's time to fire Gary. I'm like, what? He's like, it's been 6 months. You told me 6 months ago you needed 6 months. It's been 6 months, fire. I'm like, well, he's doing fine. He's doing great. And he knows he's doing fine. But that's not what Jim was looking at. Jim was like still afraid of what's going to come from it. And he's got to protect his situation because he's thinking it's making him look bad. He's like, fire him. So I bring the guy in. And he knows he's doing good. When you're rocking. And he's shocked when I say, I'm separating you from the company effective immediately. Like, what? Where does this come from? He's freaking out. He's looking for an answer. And at that point, I decided, you know what? I'm not gonna make something up. I said, you got to talk to Jim. And I told him, you just got to go talk to Jim. Did Jim do this? Go talk to Jim. Is Jim behind this? Go talk to Jim. Go talk to Jim. First time in Jim's life, he was actually demonstratively and clear and told the guy. So he asked for 90 days because he's like, it's easier to find a job when you have a job. And so I agreed to give him 90 days. And he found a job right before his 90 days was up, which was great. But in addition to that, I also gave him a package of 2-year severance plus full medical benefits. So for the next 2 years, he was actually getting 2 checks. He was getting the check from the new job, and then he still was getting the job for me. And, honestly, I did that for him, but also did a little for me because the whole situation was screwed up. But why? Why did this entire debacle even occur? It goes back to multiple layers of fear. First layer was Gary's boss didn't have the courage to fire him. And so he was afraid of dealing with that connotation. Second, Jim was afraid to tell Steve and Brian that I had hired Gary. So Jim did this for his buddy, but he knew that Brian and Steve wouldn't approve. And he didn't have the courage to face it because he wanted to take over. But when it got tough, when he realized, hey, this hire can hurt me. When it starts becoming close to home, that's when you see I'll sacrifice anyone or anything to protect my situation. And that's why Gary got thrown under the bus. Okay? Good guy went out the window. So what you need to learn from this if you're in the workplace, first of all, you need to recognize who's playing scared. Okay? Because a person in power, or even your manager or boss who's afraid, is a dangerous person. And they're dangerous because all they're concerned about is how they look. So you have to be careful. And nothing threatens a person who's afraid more than someone who is secure and confident and not afraid. Not only does it make them look bad, but there's also a chance they'll challenge them. So the thing I was always careful to do is give credit to my boss when I was doing something good, because their leadership or their guidance. And then, never take an approach that they would perceive as threatened, because once they feel threat, they'll do whatever to get out, and it can be ugly. All right. And if you're worried about not getting credit for what you're doing at work, if you're doing a really good job and people around, you don't need to toot your own horn. When you're really effective, other people will say it for you. And that actually carries a lot more power than you saying it yourself. Okay. Last, it's time for the fun fact, historical fact of the day. I'm a huge fan of American history. And so today I want to share with you the story of Ivan Allen Jr. Okay. Ivan Allen Jr. was the mayor of Atlanta in the early 60s. He was born into a wealthy family in Atlanta. His father had a successful office supply and furniture store, chain of stores, actually. And Junior grew up in that environment, actually worked in the store. He grew up a segregationist. He actually ran for governor in the 50s on a segregationist platform. All right. And he lost. But he was a businessman and he was practically his vision. And he realized early on that the South would never achieve greatness because they were held down by segregation. So in 1961, he ran for mayor in Atlanta, and he ran against a guy named Lester Maddox, who was an avowed Klansman and segregationist. And Ivan Allen made it a referendum on what type of city did Atlanta want to be. Now, you got to understand at that time, Atlanta was the second biggest city in the South. You would never guess, but the largest city was Memphis, Tennessee, and Birmingham was third. And about that time, those cities were pretty close to the same size. Same city, same place. Ivan Allen wanted to break away from that. He won the election. Day one, he eliminated the colored and white signs at City Hall. He desegregated the cafeteria. He allowed black policemen to arrest white citizens. And he hired the first black firefighters. Because he's like, we will never progress as long as we have segregation. And from there, Atlanta broke away and left those other two cities in the pack. Atlanta became the first city to have professional sports teams. Okay. 1965, the Braves came to town, the Falcons in 1966, and the Hawks in 1968. This is why Martin Luther King, who was from Atlanta, grew up in Atlanta, he had to go to Mississippi and Alabama to protest and fight against, civil rights abuses, because they weren't having riots and fires and dogs in Atlanta, because Ivan Allen had moved Atlanta past that. So progress comes from a leader with vision, and Ivan Allen Jr. was the visionary for the New South. That's all I had to share today on the Ruthless Truth. Please stay tuned onto my Instagram page for the next broadcast, and also where you can leave comments. And we'll see you next time.